New affordability measures meant to bring relief to Canadians quickened the pulse of politics this week. The Liberals are promising a temporary tax holiday for the holidays and $250 for millions of working Canadians coming this spring.
This is about making sure that people can afford to give their kids and give their families the best possible options.
What we have is a 2-month temporary tax trick.
The Liberals have shown that when they need billions of dollars in order to literally buy votes, they find it.
We fought for this. We said this is important, and the Liberals informed us that they had caved to our demands. But they included a Liberal letdown. This is temporary, and it doesn't include the monthly bills.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says his party will support the legislation, but to do that, they'll have to stop the debate currently grinding the House of Commons to a halt. It's time to bring in our party insiders. Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. Here with me, Greg McEachran is a former Liberal ministerial staffer, and Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. Hi, guys. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Thanks for coming in. So, Greg, I'll start with you on this one. As you will remember, when Erin O'Toole pitched a GST holiday in the last election campaign, the Liberals kind of dismissed it as a bit of a gimmick. They kind of, said it's a political trick that's useless, not going to really help very many people. And now we're kind of seeing some of the similar rhetoric that he used, some of the things that he said when he was pitching this policy coming out of the mouth of the Prime Minister. Why do you think that there's been this about face? Why are they kind of pushing this sort of policy now, do you think?
Wait, JP, that means that the leader of the Conservatives who just dissed this announcement ran under that one. That my good friend Fred helped.
3 years ago, it was a good idea.
So, you know what, JP, up is down, cats and dogs living together. It's a strange time in politics. So, I'm a Chrétien Martin Liberal. I was speaking to someone earlier just before the panel from that era. And, I've said this before. I believe in balanced budgets. I believe in respecting the public purse, but I also believe in taking care of people. But there is a bit of an issue here, I think, for the Liberals, where they've gotten to the point where if you can't beat them, join them. And, I'm finding I want to be consistent. For example, I criticized Scott Moe's $500 check from 2 years ago. At the time, inflation was about 7%, and that $500 went to everybody in Saskatchewan over the age of 18. Didn't matter how much money they made. And similar, Doug Ford has announced a $200 one. And I'm not, the first thing about this, about the Prime Minister's Day yesterday, I didn't love the 251, but I also, I'm smart enough to, I hope, to pay attention to current politics and that they need to try something. And at least there are some measures that limit it. On the GST thing, look, I'm going to, again, separate my kind of business brain from my political brain, and I watched the National last night. The first 7 or 8 minutes were on this. The competing network that has a news program on, same thing around the same time. The streeters are amazing on this. The people that are asked, they seem to really like it. An old trick we used to say, how did your day go? Watch the news without the sound on. The visuals are amazing. And then the last thing I'll say is, on social media, people that I went to high school, university with, that I don't think of as particularly political, they seem to love this.
Yeah, Fred, I mean, the story we did on this issue yesterday got more than 1 million clicks. Like, there is a tremendous amount of interest, probably the most read story of the year, or at least up there. Obviously, a lot of people excited or wanting to know more or kind of dialed into this issue. Do you think that the Liberals have captured the zeitgeist a bit, the populist zeitgeist with doing something like this, or is it just a political trick that they're just trying to buy votes? Like, where do you fall on this?
It's 100% a trick. Like, this was a good idea 3 years ago when the cost of living crisis began. We've been in this for 3 years, and the Liberals have not been doing anything on this to help Canadians. They're coming here last minute with this idea. The NDP came up with it last week, and all of a sudden they're coming through with this now. It just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't seem real. There's the issue, too. It's coming into effect, if it gets through everything, December 14th, 10 days before Christmas, not the holiday season. This is going, like shopping, will people delay until then? And if this doesn't become law, then what happens if this doesn't get through? There's so many issues with this. And then at the end of the day, this is just for 2 months. This is a little break right now that they're throwing in 3 years into an affordability crisis. They're putting this little thing out there. And again, it is helpful. I always love tax cuts. Love to see more cuts across the board on taxes. it goes back up in mid-February, and then 6 weeks after that, the carbon tax increase of 19% kicks in again, which is permanent and on everything. So this is
the check is April 1st, though, the one that was announced.
Sure,
they'll get a rebate.
The tax goes back up in February.
But just
14th.
including everything that was
Sure,
announced.
the 250. Like it's and when you talk about Moe and Ford, like these guys have been like cutting taxes in their provinces and fighting against the federal carbon tax. It's apples and oranges here, where these guys are being consistent with what they're trying to do. This seems like Trudeau showing up. You know, he's trying to make waves right now. What the Conservatives want to do is raise the tide for everybody, and that's where their program.
I thought Pierre Poilievre's perspective on this was interesting yesterday, only because he kind of slammed it and said, you know, we're going to have to deal with the carbon tax, some of the things that you're saying. They're going to have to deal with the cost of housing. Things have gone up, yada, yada. This is not necessarily going to help. But when pressed by reporters whether he'd actually support it, he wouldn't say. He said he wants to see what is actually put before them when the Liberals table this legislation. So he was kind of talking it down, but not necessarily against it. I mean, how do you square that one?
Look, we always like tax cuts, but the issue is we don't quite know what this is going to look like. They put out these random products in there, like this is going to cut this, but not this. And again, like Christmas trees was a part of it, which is mostly a cash business. But December 14th,
curious information, right?
but December 14th, like 10 days before Christmas, is when these are supposed to come in. This feels like it was written on the back of a napkin over the weekend after they read what the NDP did last week.
Yeah, I mean, I just bought a freaking Christmas tree, and I missed out. I mean, I like to put mine up early. I think December 14th or 15th is like a little late for me in the season, Mel. I don't know. What do you think? Is this a good piece of public policy, or is it a populist trick?
Right. So maybe I'll say I think it's maybe a little bit of the trick on behalf of the Liberals, but I do think it's good policy if they would have followed what the NDP had said that they wanted to do if they were elected. What I find particularly funny, or maybe that I want to point out, is since March 2022, every single one that the Liberal government has put forward, or every single policy measure that they've brought forward to make people's lives better, is directly because of the NDP. They haven't done one thing, including, you know, what they announced this week, that wasn't pushed by the NDP, that wasn't proposed by the NDP, that wasn't, you know, put on the table by the NDP. So if I'm the NDP and I'm getting ready to go talk to folks, or to go continue to talk to folks on the doorstep in the lead up to the next election, my message should be clear, and it is, you know, why do half measures with this government? You know, we've proven to you the last 2.5 years that we govern in the interests of people, and we put people first, and we make people's lives better. So count on us. So I really liked the announcement that Jagmeet put forward last week, that he said he was going to do if he was Prime Minister. I think this is a bit of a watered down version. The fact that it's, you know, temporary doesn't totally help, and the fact that bills aren't included, and I don't think home heating is either. So those things I think would have made a bigger difference in people's lives, particularly as we're going through, you know, winter seasons, and those home heating bills are quite expensive. But again, I liked it when Jagmeet said it last week. I think people are really having a hard time, and we need to show them that we hear them. So I think that's what we saw the Liberals this week do this week. But all, I think, credit to the NDP. And not to the Prime Minister on this.
It is uncanny that, like, Jagmeet comes up with an idea and then the Liberals have it the next day. I don't know if it's like the NDP are getting some intel from the Liberals and then rushing out to say we are doing this, you know, and then they can claim credit for it after, or if the Liberals are just picking up on good ideas. I don't really know, but there was a school food program and now this, and there is some sort of linkage there. Greg, Mel was just talking about making this permanent. There's probably a reason why the government didn't go the permanent route, because it's hugely expensive, right? I mean, I think it was like $6.5 billion for what they were proposing to make it permanent forever. But this program that the Liberals are proposing, the cheques and the GST, HST cut, is about $6.5 billion for a one-time thing. I mean, we're probably on pace for Chrystia Freeland to blow well past, right, her fiscal anchors at this point. I mean, she said they would keep the deficit to $40 billion for this fiscal year. The parliamentary budget officer has said they're well past that already. You pile on a few more billion with this thing. Has the government just abandoned fiscal prudence at this point? Do you think that they're just giving up any hope of getting back to a balanced budget, of actually sticking to their guardrails, of trying to keep the credit rating that we have now with lower spending?
So it's interesting that when Doug Ford had a pretty massive increase, he's got the largest cabinet, everything, and I'm not trying to do the squirrel and point over there, but it's, you know, he is able to be politically successful with these, and you don't see a lot of people criticizing. I was on a radio panel this week with a Conservative who, like, in the same breath was telling Liberals to increase the percentage of GDP. It's 1.37 to go up to 2, but in the same breath talking about affordability. And where do Canadians want us to spend? A couple of things. I think Erin O'Toole's announcement was for the month of December, I think, and this is for 3 months. And I've seen some pushback from the CFIB on this. In my experience, the closer to Christmas, the better the deals. You're making a risk over reward. You're going to have less selection, but you may have better deals. So that may work out for you. But Andrew Bevan, who's the Liberal campaign director, sent me a really interesting ad before I came on air from a major retailer that said, if you buy now and you come back after December 14th, 15th, whatever it is, with your receipt, we will give you the difference. The other thing I would say, and as someone who used to manage a fairly large office, people are really pushed at Christmas. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of spending. And you see a lot of organizations, especially in the service industry, do their Christmas celebrations in January. And people have probably spent a lot of money. This goes on through January and February. We hear a lot from food banks that that's a really tough time for them as well in January. So the anecdotal information would be, or suggestion would be, that in January and February, people also need a little bit of help, especially after Christmas. So I think that may have something to do with the timing.
You danced around that deficit question, though. Do you think that they've blown past?
It's scary. It's scary as hell. And again, the Chrétien Martin era Liberal, like, that was one of the things that they mentioned to me was the guardrails. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Fred, the national debt, $1.4 trillion. It's about $54 billion a year to service that debt. They're piling on more spending, although we are in a good fiscal position relative, I guess, to other G7 countries, right? We're certainly better off than the United States is, although they're kind of the reserve currency for the world, so it's a different circumstance. But when you look at more spending, I was even speaking to the new Liberal Premier of New Brunswick earlier, and she said she's worried about the fiscal capacity of the federal government because they keep piling on more and more and more. Are you worried?
Absolutely. Justin Trudeau in his prime ministership has doubled the national debt. Every prime minister from 1867 until Stephen Harper contributed an X amount to the debt. He doubled that.
Can you say the pandemic, though, please?
Of course, the pandemic.
There was unique circumstances.
There's these random things. He just came out with this $6 billion thing that I think they wrote on a napkin this weekend. These guys spend money. He did it in 2015 when he ran. He said, we can have $10 billion deficits. Yes, the pandemic was obviously a big expense. But he hasn't stopped since then. They keep throwing out these different programs, the dental care, the pharmacare, all these things they're doing. And we're talking about a fiscal anchor. They're using these words, but it doesn't seem to mean anything. And I think Canada, and I think that's where Pierre Poilievre is running on fix the budget. I don't know how he's going to do that. I don't know what that's going to look like, but it's going to be an immense, immense challenge. And we're going down a dangerous road fiscally here in this country, the way we're just blowing money out the door.
The government would argue, well, people really need help right now, that there is this affordability crunch, that it's better for us to take on that spending and that debt as opposed to putting it on the backs of Canadians. Do you buy what they're selling?
Well, look, if there's certain programs that work, but there's all these programs that they're building that don't impact people's affordability, the affordability crisis, the dental care and pharmacare, first right off the bat. There's so much of that it does elevate certain people that need it, but it's a small chunk of the population that's benefiting from it. Again, as I said earlier, they're making waves with these announcements, but they're not rising the tide of all Canadians.
Greg, you wanted to say something?
No, I'm going to throw to Mel because Mel's better on the dental care than I am.
Mel, I was interested to hear from NDP MP Blake Desjardins yesterday or the day before, and he was saying that it's not necessarily a given that he's going to vote against the fall economic statement, that their party is going to vote against the FES. We also heard from NDP MP Don Davies, who was saying, well, the election's still a year away. So there was a lot of rhetoric this week that really struck me that suggests the NDP are around for the longer haul, or at least the medium-term haul, I guess you could say. Is it because they're pitching policies like this, the Liberal government has kind of brought the NDP back into the fold? Because it seems like they're not going anywhere right now.
I don't know that it's that the government has brought them back into the fold. I think that there's some important things that the NDP is going to make sure that the government delivers on before they walk away. Just to go back to the dental care and pharmacare. I don't know if you've been to the dentist recently, but it is really expensive when you go to the dentist. So when you talk about, the difference between getting your teeth checked or putting food on the table, that makes a massive difference in people's lives. So I just want to make sure to correct the record on dental care and pharmacare is an affordability measure that makes people's lives less expensive, particularly for folks who have diabetes as well. But on the same pharmacare subject, that is one thing I think that the NDP is really waiting to see how those conversations with the provinces go. It was disappointing to see, I think it was last week, there was a story about how some of the premiers had said that the Prime Minister and the Health Minister hadn't started those conversations about that kind of pharmacare, the birth control, the diabetes with the provinces. And even provinces who typically say, stay out of my backyard or give us the money, we're not interested, are open to having that conversation. So hopefully the government starts moving on that and can start moving on that quickly in the new year. And I just, if you don't mind, JP, me going back to a question earlier about, how expensive these things are, I think fiscal prudence is really important, but it is about making choices. And one of the things that I like about what the NDP has put forward with this, that the Liberals aren't, is they have made it super clear what their choices are going to be. And while they may be losing revenue with exempting home heating, et cetera, from GST, they've made it super clear where they're going to go get that extra revenue. And that's something that the Liberals aren't willing to do. So it is about choices. It is important to be prudent fiscally. But when you look at what folks are talking about, the Liberals, we've seen what they've said. The Conservatives, to Fred's point, we don't know what they're going to cut, and that can be pretty worrisome for a lot of folks. And then we've got the NDP saying, here's what we're going to do to make your life better, but we're not going to continue to let these guys get away with subsidies, et cetera. So I think that's pretty important.
The NDP does have a plan to pay for it. I think it includes raising corporate taxes rate and going after the wealthy. Maybe not the best idea, though, as Donald Trump contemplates cutting the corporate tax rate to 15% in the United States. You might have some businesses up and leave. But yeah, I guess they actually have a plan, right? They actually have detailed something that they will do to pay for their larger social welfare state. A Liberal MP stepping away from his cabinet role spiked the pulse of politics in Ottawa this week. Former Employment Minister Randy Boissonnault had been at the centre of controversy for months as a list of allegations about his business dealings and claims of his family heritage grew.
There's a lot of information swirling around. I can tell you I've been here a long time. The best way to tackle that is to focus exclusively on it and make sure that that's what you're doing. And it would have been very hard for him to both do his job and to take an opportunity to defend himself personally.
I was very pleased today, and I'm certain Indigenous people right across this country welcome the news of the resignation of one of the most prolific pretendians in the House of Commons, and it's time that we address this issue moving forward. It's true that the Liberals have let people down. They've let Indigenous people down in particular.
True or false? The Prime Minister should have fired that guy a long time ago.
With Boissonnault gone, the Liberals are without an MP from Alberta at their cabinet table. Their only other Alberta MP stood up in caucus a few weeks ago and called for the Prime Minister to step aside. Now, this all played out as this week the House of Commons neared 2 months of paralysis over a privilege debate. Let's bring back our party insiders, Melanie Richer, Greg McEachran, and Fred Delory. Hey, guys, welcome back. So, Greg, let's talk about Parliament being paralyzed. I like starting with you on this one. 6 sitting weeks. 2 calendar months that Parliament has essentially done nothing, right? They've done some things on the Jasper National Park legislation. They had bipartisan, or all parties agreed to that. There's been some other things here and there, but otherwise not much of anything. How long do you think this can go on? Do you think the Liberals can hold out handing over the documents that the Conservatives and the NDP and the Bloc want? Do you think they can hold out until Christmas on this? Or do you think at some point they're going to have to relent to actually start getting some of the things we've been talking about through the House of Commons?
So it pushed back a little bit. I think in October there were about 6 bills that got royal assent, and then there was, I think, a handful of private members' bills. You mentioned Jasper, things that I worked on in my past, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Agreement. There's the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador version of it as well. There's I think about 6 that by October 31st. Is this important? Yes. Are Canadians aware? Probably not. My former boss, Michelle Caderio, was on a panel here earlier this week. She summed it up much better than I did. But it does, I think if the average Canadian, as was told about this, they'd have a hard time understanding it. And all they see usually from Parliament is the theatrics from the House of Commons, something that, in question period, something that John Turner called it something, baloney theater for the sake of a family show. So I don't think a lot of Canadians are actually aware. And I think that the NDP deciding to kind of allow this to go through is probably politically wise for them, because it's going to give them, as Mel said in the earlier segment, something that they can point to, wave around, but it's also something that you can say, yeah, we are actually trying to get some work done here.
I guess like Canadians not noticing, it can't just be the only bar, right, to cross though. Like, I mean, at some point, you're going to have to do the business of the government and the country, right? Like, I feel like, fair enough, I'm sure there aren't a lot of people at home totally worried about Parliament not sitting or not doing much during their sittings for the last number of weeks. But they
here,
can't
JP, I thought you were a cynic, There's a Pollyanna inside you, good stuff.
Well, I mean, I just think that they're pitching all these things to help with affordability, and yet nothing's getting through. Like, I mean, at some point they have to say uncle, right? They have to hand over what the Conservatives, the NDP, and the Bloc want, don't they? I mean,
I don't know. I mean, I'm a former director of parliamentary affairs for a minister. I think there are 3 opposition days left for the Conservatives. I think there's 1 for the New Democrats. And if you're the government and the opposition wants to waste those, and they don't have to face, a confidence vote, because they do not roll over to the next calendar year, as I understand it. The government may say, let's just hang on till Christmas.
Fred, do you think the Liberals will relent on this at some point? I mean, they want to get a lot of things done. I had Karina Gould on earlier this week, the government House leader. They have a long list of things that they want to accomplish, including the things we've been talking about here, these affordability measures that are set to take effect in only a few short weeks. I mean, how can they go on like this? I mean, they can't really, can they? They'll have to at some point say, all right, enough's enough.
All they need to do is hand over unredacted documents to the RCMP. That's all they need to do. And we move on. Parliament will be unfrozen.
Did the RCMP want the documents?
That's not the matter. It's about parliamentary privilege. The House of Commons voted to hand these unredacted documents to the RCMP, and the government is refusing. All they need to do, they can complain, and this GST thing we just talked about may not even become law. And we have these companies now saying, hey, you can bring your check back or your receipt back. It may not become law because it can't be debated in the House because Parliament is frozen. It is paralyzed. But this is the doing of the Liberal government. They could unfreeze this by simply giving these documents over. If they don't, obviously, maybe they're going to try to make a deal with the NDP by stealing the policy that they announced last week and hoping that they will shut down the question of privilege debate and forcing this through. The NDPs seem like they're not going to buy for that or go with that. They've been quite clear last week that they won't. So I think, this whole GST thing isn't actually going to happen unless the Liberals, or any of their other matters, unless the Liberals hand over the documents. This is their doing. They're in government. They control their own destiny on this. It's very simple.
They say it sets a bad precedent to demand the government hand over documents to the police, that there are charter issues at play here, that this might be, something that other governments might be forced to go through when it's not an appropriate matter to do this. What do you say to that?
Is Parliament not supreme? Are we not a democracy? When the House of Commons votes on a motion like this, should we not make it or consider it a serious matter for the government to undemocratically say, no, we're not going to do that? What is democracy then? It's an affront to democracy not to do this.
Mel, do you think the NDP are going to hold out on this? I mean, it seems like Jagmeet Singh is pretty dug in. He also wants to see the unredacted documents. He is not going to let the Liberals off the hook, or at least he says. But yeah, he wants to get these affordability measures passed as well. I mean, how do they fit into all this?
Right. So I'm probably going to get this wrong, but what I was explained from folks at the NDP is there is a way to maybe pause the privilege motion to get GST through the House and through the House quickly. And that's what the NDP has agreed to do, while being clear that they are not suspending the motion of privilege in front of the House, because they too want to see the documents. But from what I understand, there is some Parliament procedure that they can do so that they can spend a day debating the GST measures, get it passed quickly and get it to people quickly, and then go back to the motion of privilege kind of the next day. Apologies, I don't have
Yeah, no, there's some sort of complicated formula they're going to follow for one single day. Some parliamentary experts are raising some eyebrows about it because it does seem a little complicated, but I guess they'll figure out a way to do it. I don't know.
And shame on the NDP for allowing that, though. Like, if demand the documents. If this but this isn't an important matter. If it's important to get this tax cut through, the GST thing, then say, okay, we'll do it. We'll support you to do this, but hand over the documents to the RCMP. Like, why are you allowing them off the hook on different matters that you like, but not, like, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of does incentivize, right, the government a little bit. They can still get what they want, and they don't have to hand over the documents.
But I don't know that this is what the government wants, right? I think this is what the NDP has made clear they want because they know people need it. So if the government is looking to other matters that they have that they want to pass, why not do the same thing? Why not say, hey, this, bill, this, whatnot, we really want to pass, but we're not willing to compromise like we've done in the past with the papers that are being asked of to be given to the RCMP. Why not do the same thing? Why not work with the Conservatives, the Bloc, or the NDP and say, this is really important to us. Here's what we're willing to do to make that happen. I think it's super smart that the NDP was able to say, we're going to get help to people who are saying to us they need help. They're looking for support. They're saying life is expensive. And if we are going to suspend this motion of privilege for one day to make sure that people get those help, I don't know how any Liberal Conservative says shame on the NDP for that. Like, folks who are going to answer that.
The Canadians are already aware that there's a potential GST cut coming. I hate to say viral because it's such an old term, but this went viral. To use your old line about if you're explaining you're lost, the Conservatives have a tough job explaining what this unredacted document, people just start to nod off. So the reality is, why is this happening? Because the NDP are smart enough to know that this, as Mel said earlier, this is what people want. People will know about this. People are very focused about spending at Christmas. They're very focused on their families. They are aware of this. Some little fight in the House of Commons that they need to be explained. It's not a winner. It's not a political winner. Simple as that.
Let's squeeze in Randy Boissonnault before we let you guys go. Greg, what do you make of this? Do you think that the Prime Minister let Randy twist too long in the wind on some of these issues? I mean, it took a while for him to be shown the door.
I think, the obvious answer, I've seen other, hosts here talk about it as well. If it was in Alberta where they had, 2 members of Parliament, it would not have lasted this long. When we chatted last Friday about this, the Randy Boissonnault was put out on the, in terms of the NDP MP that was speaking, I read a correction on a CBC website article dated September of 2019 where, Mr. Boissonnault corrected that himself. So the problem is there are a bunch of issues with this, and there are one. They all get lumped in together, and it's a no-win situation. If the only reason that he lasted as long as he did was because the Liberals just don't have a ton of bench strength from Alberta.
Yeah, and Randy Boissonnault has maintained he never said that he himself was Indigenous, but that his family members were Indigenous. But I guess there was some confusion among everybody else. I don't know. Greg or Fred, do you think that, what do you make of him waiting so long to show Randy Boissonnault the door? I mean, it's not just the Indigenous ancestry question, right? There's also serious questions about whether a cabinet minister was dealing with his business.
Right.
A business that does business with the government and gets federal contracts, right? I mean, that to me is probably actually more serious, right, than some shifting claims.
That's what brought this all to the light in the first place, right? It was the whole scandal about his company and what was going on there, and the other Randy, where there was some texts with the co-owner talking about Randy getting things done. The other thing funny with this company is it said it was wholly owned by an Indigenous owner. It implies the whole thing. This was a tough decision by the Liberals where they either had to get rid of him or admit something here, and they've now chosen they've admitted or keep him or admit, with other things just trickling out, dripping out. Every week there seem to be other things. This has been going on for 6 months, this story. The good thing is they do have another Liberal member of Parliament in Alberta. George Cahill in Calgary could go in. He could be a representative for he got charged by Elections Canada for breaching the Elections Act by stealing Canadian mail. So
you cleared that blockage there. I watched that in real time.
I forgot. He probably shouldn't go in either. I'm going to go out there on a limb. I'm going to say in the next election, Liberals may have a big challenge getting elected in Alberta next time.
Yeah. Okay.
That's why they pay you the big bucks, Fred.
I'm writing that one down, and we're going to hold you to it. That should be an easy one. Mel, I mean, Randy Boissonnault has maintained all along he hasn't been doing, he did not do business with his former business, that this is all wrong, his former business partner's to blame, that he, never claimed he was Indigenous. Like, he has been pretty clear about how this is all made up and it's not a big thing and it should just go away and don't hold me to it. I mean, do you think that he was right to stay around this long, and was the Prime Minister... was it kosher for him to keep him around this long?
Right. So typically, and I know that these things are complicated, they're hard, and it's hard to make a decision of when to remove yourself. But when you're part of a team, and particularly part of cabinet or part of caucus, you really cannot afford, and you really don't want to give your guy a bad day. You don't want your leader to have to be responding to questions about whether you've done something or not done something. And when we were talking about this last week, it had already been on for a few weeks, right? Because it had started, of course, with what was happening with his business partner. So the fact that for weeks, questions were being asked to the Prime Minister about, Randy Boissonnault, that's not good. So yeah, he probably did wait too long. And I know that those are, personal things, and you want to prove that your character is solid or whatnot, and whether it is or it isn't, at the end of the day, this Prime Minister can't afford to be speaking about whether Minister or Randy Boissonnault did or didn't do something, and this should have come way quicker.
Well, now he has Now he has the opportunity to fight those allegations outside of cabinet, right? That's how it goes. That's what the Prime Minister was saying. That's why he has to be removed. He'll be in a better position to take on those allegations outside of cabinet. All right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much to our party insiders, Melanie Richer, Greg McEachran, and Fred Delory. Thanks, guys. That was a good discussion.